The reason is that there's so much going on inside Actian right now that this, I think, is really important news, but we're eager to share because I think it's important, like I said before. So let's talk about the graph side for a minute. If you remember my story about the data fanning in and going through a pipeline and coming out to some analytic engine and analytic goodness, I'm thinking multiple analytic engines, multiple analytic techniques to give you different kinds of insights. To go back to Rumsfeld, he said there are the known knowns I want to know. SQL might be very good for that. Standard queries, I want an instant report, I want a dashboard, I want performance monitoring, I want to know where I am on my KPIs. There's the known unknowns. I know I have fraud, I don't know exactly where it is or what it is. Let me apply some high data science to it so I can get a grip on it. And then there's the unknown unknowns. Just what the hell is going on in my data that I don't understand? And I'll give you a shortcut phrase for that. Think of that as anomaly detection. In a way, anomaly detection is a really important analytic technique. You don't go home at night and write 100,000 queries just so you can accidentally write the right query to accidentally find some aberrant behavior in your event logs from yesterday. It would be nice if the data could speak to you more spontaneously, if the data itself self-arranged and self-organized into patterns so that I could see the shape of the data. So we do things like SQL, and we all understand SQL very well, and you rush your data into that structured schema that is friendly for certain kinds of query workloads. And I get that, that's a very structured world. And I even get machine learning and my expensive data scientists, and I give them mountains of data, and they search for fuzzy needles in giant haystacks, and they're good at that. But what about an analytic technique that let me dive into my data and not ask questions, have my data talk to me spontaneously? How could you do that? Well, it turns out that data has shape. This is a quote from another company, so don't say Actian, but it's a beautiful one. Data has shape, and shape has meaning. So what if I could ask the data to organize itself into some natural shape, maybe with gravitational pull, and I could see clusters of data points of events that were kind of near each other, and I could see weird outliers of events that are not near each other. Is nearness an analytic technique? Is connectedness an interesting analytic method? Well, I think it is. We all know the phrase now, the social graph. The social graph is me and my friends and how connected I am, and I'm a friend of a friend of a friend. We maybe, if any of you use LinkedIn, probably everybody does, LinkedIn offers a graph of your network, of who you are, the main cluster, and then your friend, and that friend has a lot of coworkers and people on LinkedIn. That's a big cluster, and then there's one person out there that doesn't know anybody, doesn't have any friends. It's kind of an outlier. And so these patterns, these inherent patterns that are in event data, I think could be interesting. You guys heard of the NSA project, I'm sure, that hit the United States as a scandal about 5 months ago, 6 months ago, where the NSA, our national security agency, volunteered. It wasn't quite a volunteer, but it emerged that they had been listening to every single phone call and every email in the United States. Well, A, you might be fascinated. By the way, that was a big Hadoop project. How do you collect all the data in the world and put it in one damn place so you can ask questions? That's a hard problem. So you sort of admire the technical virtuosity, notwithstanding the political implications. So they did it. But here's what they did. They put it all into a graph database. They put everything that happened into a big graph database, like your social graph, so that they could see who was close to who. Because one of the killer apps of graph technology is, if Mike's a bad guy, it might be interesting to know who Mike called on the telephone in the last 24 hours or 48 hours. And then it might be interesting who that person talked to. And then it might be interesting who that person talked to, in a daisy chain kind of way. And that's what a graph is. It picks some entity in the world like me, and then it measures that entity on some attribute or fact that I care about. Mike went to this school. Mike has this friend. Mike is this tall. Mike likes Bayern München. Mike doesn't like the New York Yankees. And so these are natural affinities. This is sometimes called relationship analytics or affinity analytics. And so graph technology says that entities in the world, cars, chairs, people, have attributes, and I could graph those attributes in terms of how close they are. Market basket analysis. Certain products are in your retail basket close to other products more often than not. Why? And so the idea of graph technology is that if I could pour my data into a natural graphing engine, what we would call a graph analysis engine, I could see relationships emerge spontaneously because graph engines measure how close or far objects are from each other. And that's why people are interested, because they want to know natural clusters, who are the influencers, who are the big players, and they want to know the outliers or the anomalies that are very far away. And it turns out that humans are very good at studying graphs. If I think of the SQL thing, I'm not that good at SQL. If I really have a tough problem, I have to go find a SQL guru who can fashion that 8-way join and get the data can then talk to me. If I want to know and build a better predictive model in machine learning, I have to go find a data scientist. But what if I could use my own visual cortex, my own, I can look out the window right now and I can see, instant elevation. I can see 50 different colors of beige. I can see depth. The human has the ability to see things. It's an analytic engine that is underutilized. What if we could take our data and render it in a graph format? And you've seen graphs before, these network diagrams. There's kind of a starburst cluster and pipelines and small clusters out here. What if you could arrange any data in the world arbitrarily into a graph and begin to see the connectedness, the gravitational pull or push of the various data elements? And that's the idea behind graph analytics. That is right now, Gartner calls it the hottest new technology of the year. It's exciting a lot of people because it's an additional novel analytic technique that you could use on your data. And it would be a very good way, not necessarily to do complex, mature analytics, but to do that early stage of discovery. Just what the hell is going on in my data? Why are these 2 people meeting in this cafe at 2 o'clock? Why are 8 people on my network all went to the same college? Why? And for me to, as I said before, for me to go home and write a billion queries to accidentally ask every question that could be asked is very expensive. So I'll let my data gravitationally self-organize itself into a nexus of heavy vortex, sort of complexity and closeness, and distance and anomalies and outliers. And so that analytic technique is interesting. How do you achieve it? Well, you have to have a graph engine. So in the same way that Google said we should have different computational engines or frameworks for different analytic techniques, we arrived at the same notion, and many people are arriving at the same notion. Search, for example, is another analytic technique. There's a company called Splunk that's done very well with search. So search is an analytic technique, graph is an analytic technique, machine learning is an analytic technique, SQL is, these are all fair game for us to deploy. What Actian has decided to do is to add that third additional analytic technique into its core platform. So we haven't talked much about the Actian products, but the various investments we made were assembled into a single platform that we call the Actian Analytics Platform. And currently, what's going out the door is the Hadoop edition of that Actian Analytics Platform. So the main thing that we go to market with, Jason carries our flag in all of APAC, ANZ, and he is offering to the world something called the Actian Analytics Platform, which is that complete end-to-end story to do all of the analytics, the ingest, the data preparation, and the advanced analytics. And we're going to announce on November 4th, just a few days in the future, a brand new analytic engine and capability that will be part of that Actian Analytics Platform. Let me give you some background on how we got there. I think it's fun. The human side of these stories are always interesting. How many here have heard of Netezza as a product? It's pretty successful. They kind of revolutionized the data warehouse space by bringing appliances and open source Postgres databases to the space. So the technical co-founder of Netezza was a guy named Barry Zane. who is quite famous in the software industry. And Barry writes really good software. Like Simon was saying earlier, a lot of software is really bad, knows nothing about parallelism, multi-threading, distributed architectures. Well, that's what Barry does. And so he wrote, from scratch, a super parallel distributed relational database that was good for data warehousing. A few years after Netezza, which was monstrously successful, dominated the space, IBM bought them for $1 billion. They're really famous as a backbone of that. Barry left Netezza and founded a company called Paracel, which we acquired a few years ago. That's why we now have Barry in our stable of high talent. So Barry then said, you know, Netezza is sort of interesting, but it demands too much specialty hardware. It is not columnar. It is not analytic. It's not software only. You know, I could do it better. And so Paracel was his invention back in 2005. And Paracel was one of the world's first pure software, all columnar, all analytic, written from scratch database technology. And there's only a handful of those in the world. We own a couple of them at Actian, so that's where we spend our money. So he's a sharp guy, and he knows a lot about databases, a lot about how to write super scaling, modern distributed software for modern distributed commodity infrastructure. So a couple of years ago, Barry said, databases are sort of interesting. Let me stretch a little bit and look at graph engines. And so he sat down to write a next generation super scaling graph analytics engine. His startup company is called Sparkle City. They have a website. You're welcome to go look at it. Sparkle City is a venture-funded startup in the classic sense. Actian is the primary investor. So when we bought Paracel, Barry was already working on this project, and we loved it, and we decided to encourage him, and we invested in it. So he spun out his own company called Sparkle City, and they launched earlier this year their first product called Sparkleverse, and that's what will be in the press release on November 4th. Is that we have announced a relationship with Sparkle City where we can carry Sparkleverse and add it as an additional analytic engine and capability to the Actian analytics platform. And I'm excited by this personally. I've been working with Barry and his technology for a year and a half now in my innovation lab, and it's amazing. So when Barry writes software, it scales. So graph databases and graph technology, like a lot of software, is not as scalable as you would want it to be. So he has written a full MPP, meaning scale out, parallel distributed, in memory, trying to exploit every single ounce of performance that you can, fully parallelized, fully distributed graph analysis engine. He's run some early benchmarks on it. I don't know if the benchmark information is in the press release. I know I've seen it internally, but it's just stunning in terms of how many magnitudes of price performance improvement he's achieved over traditional graph technology. And so I'm very excited by this because I think graph is an important new analytic engine. I think it delivers a different kind of discovery insight. I think it lets me, in a kind of a free way, ask my data to order itself and understand relationships between my data that might provoke other questions that I would then run to my SQL engine or run to my machine learning gurus to probe further. And so I'm very happy as a technologist that we are pioneering, and I really think this is going to be the most advanced analytics engine in the world for graph technology, that we found Barry, that we funded Barry, that he launched his product, and that we're going to pick it up. He went to market about 6 months ago, and we're going to pick it up and add it as a distribution channel for him into the Actian Analytics platform. You can go to his website, you can download it for free. It's like a lot of stuff we have. You can go to our website and download the Express edition of our complete analytics platform for free. So we're trying to get in the right culture of the new world of software and make these things readily available for people to adopt and experiment with as easily as they can. So that's the essence of the announcement. Graph technology is an important new player in the analytic repertoire. We've got one, and ours is, like everything else in our platform, built for the next 30 years. So it can ingest at any scale, can prep at any scale, and can analyze at any scale. I'm happy to take a couple of questions on it if you guys are curious about graph. So I love the question. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I had to smile because it just spoke to me. Please.
I'm not familiar with graph.
So.
And you're saying how you get to perceive relations.
Great question. And I'm taking some CTO liberty when I said see that. I was imagining a little bit of the future. But you asked an important question. It goes to that visual cortex point I was making earlier. Until you visualize things, it's hard to bring the human into the game. That's why we like Tableau. So think of SQL. Here's how I'd answer your question. Think of SQL engines. They're low-level engines that have APIs, and you can write a select statement against the API, and you can write a join, and you can kind of hack your way through the weeds. Or you can step up a level and use something like Tableau or Yellowfin, an Australian product that's awesome, and enter the data through a visualization interface that's very powerful, who then performs the background select statements and knows which 8-way join to make to optimize that query. So with that understanding of that visualization offers the human a more interesting, more powerful shortcut to the data, I expect Barry is not that today. He is just the low-level engine. The reason his company is called Sparkle is because Sparkle, S-P-A-R-Q-L, SQL, is the emerging SQL standard for the semantic web for graph technologies. There are many competing standards, just like in the early days of SQL 30 years ago, there were 8 dialects of SQL and competing standards. It's like that in the young space of graph databases, but he has adopted a SQL-like standard for access. So today, his product, the one that we can ship, is only that low-level graph engine with its low-level interface. I say low-level, that's a query-type interface, so not very low-level. He does have a low-level API below that as well. My vision, and the experiments I've been doing, is wouldn't it be beautiful to have a visualization canvas on top of that? So I could see the data in a graph format in a network diagram on the screen. And I've even gone one step further. What if it was a living graph? What if I could snip off a cluster and the cluster went away and everything else reorganized itself on the screen into the secondary node that might be more important, that was hidden behind the primary influencer? Because it's the secondary influencer who might really be important in this case. And so yeah, I'm looking for, in a future roadmap kind of way, Actian to deliver a visualization layer, or anybody, because it doesn't require us because it's an open API. And I think for Graph to succeed in the coming years, it must have that element of visualization. I'm glad you asked the question, because it is the natural way to look at that kind of data. And we're going to make available this sort of internal Skunkworks project if people want it. But it's very early days for everybody, so there isn't much out there right now. I don't know if you've messed with some of the open source projects. There's some visualization capabilities, but they don't scale very well. They suffer the same problem that almost all software has. It was written for a laptop or a server, and it works great until you pour 8 trillion rows in, and then it falls apart. So yeah, keep your eye on us and see if we can live up to that. But I think a good graph engine should have a good visualization layer on top.
Visualization practitioners, and they're actually part of their skill in the event is to be human filters and to decide what can be represented well as visualization and what will tell a good story.
Yeah.
So the machine visualization.
Yeah, I think it's critical. In fact, I expect to see a tremendous investment by the software industry in visualizations, and I don't just mean pie charts. So I mean more dynamic, interactive processes of how the data renders itself for you to observe and watch and maybe participate in. It's the Minority Report, if you've ever seen that movie, of data visualization. It has to go that way. We have to interactively work with our data through some kind of visualization interface. But I don't want to sound too pie in the sky. That's a futures thing. But it's a great question. I like it. It's relevant. So I'm going to sit down and everybody will get their food and we can keep talking